regularly. So that's always interesting for me to talk with him because he's got a medical background. He talks often on questions of the present condition of the COVID virus. So we get sort of a latest update on what's going on with that. In the meantime, I'm doing a little brief open lines segment here on Zoom. You're certainly welcome to join the program and to do so by phone. What is on your mind this afternoon? We've got a real live, genuine phone number that can be assessed and that you can literally call the program. Probably, in fact, you can in a way that is absolutely similar to an old-fashioned radio talk show. The number is 617-396-4958. That number again is 617-396-4958. There's a lot going on that, to my way of thinking, is discouraging. I think that we're seeing a consolidation of power on the part of this administration to further codify and advance their agenda. And it's one that brings us back to the old days, exactly what they wanted, of socialism at home and perpetual war abroad. There's already an escalation, speaking abroad, of military personnel in Syria. You have them already snubbing Israel. There's already been now, because of this new administration, Oman is not normalizing relations with Israel, whereas they might have done so otherwise. And in fact, we're talking about it because this new administration appears to be tilting in the direction of Iran. They're also, saying, "Oh, we're going back to the days of internationalism," and they've talked about that openly. We're going to kiss up to the European allies. In other words, we're not going to make them pay for their own defense, and it's going to be back to the old, issue of international entanglements, and the United States being used as kind of a cat's paw for the world. And, it's not happening overnight, but it does seem to be consolidating in that direction. You have the nomination of Merrick Garland for Attorney General, someone who, the left has been singing and chanting his praises for years because he was not confirmed for the U.S. Supreme Court. And now I think we can see that was good. We know why maybe he wasn't confirmed, besides the fact that he would have taken over the slot from Antonin Scalia. The man is way out there on the left. He's literally almost a fairly open socialist. He's making his agenda cracking down on alleged racism and institutional racism. First of all, I thought we already had laws about that. Weren't those laws put in place in the 1960s? You cannot have a corporation discriminating against a person based on race. And by the way, they've now added, and I can't get into this on YouTube because we're verboten to talk about it, but they've added gender, identification to the list of people who are going to now be protected. So, if you want to call yourself something other than what you are, I suppose, you get special protections. I guess that, again, we can't get too specific about that because this is YouTube and this is verboten in these times. But under these new guidelines, I think legally, you can make the case that you can call yourself anything you want, right? Who is to say? Like, for example, I can make up my age if I want. I could say I'm younger or I'm older if it suits a particular thing. I could say I'm black. I could say I'm any race I want to say I am. And who is a private company? Who is an individual? Who is the government to dispute that? If you dispute that, you're a bigot. I can make up anything. Why would I not, if you can make up your gender, you can make up anything. I could say, I mean, I have an elderly relative that, she can declare herself young again. Why not? If you can be whatever you want to be, then you can be it. Anyways, that's now protected under, in other words, if somebody declares themselves, and I'm trying to be careful here because, again, this is YouTube and I don't want to be verboten. If you declare yourself to be a certain thing and somebody says, no, you're not that thing, that person can be destroyed. They can, they can be sued. They can be denounced. They can be purged if they disagree. I know that I'm broadening the definition, but why not? If we're going to redefine, then who's to say who gets to do the defining, and why should they? So you have, therefore, getting back to Merrick Garland, he wants to put in more emphasis on going after people who are involved in what he calls institutional racism. And without defining exactly what that means, and given the fact that we already have laws in place to prevent a company from discriminating against someone based on race, you have to ask yourself what he means. Is this enforcing existing laws, or is this expanding laws? Are we going to get into, micromanagement, thought control? If somebody thinks, if you say that somebody should succeed in business, maybe that might be seen as, and in some circles that is seen as having something against a minority, something against an African-American man or woman, which itself is racist. Because success, we ought to encourage all people to be as successful as they can be. And the idea that somehow success is a white thing, that's racism. But that's apparently the thinking of a lot of the people that are incoming in this administration. We have an Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services who is saying, and again, I want to be delicate here because this is YouTube, that people can take drugs at a young age if they want to transform their physical identity. Do we know, are there any studies done on the long term, let alone the short term physical effects of these drugs? Do they lead to disease? Do they lead to disability? Do they lead to cancer? Do we know that before we start letting people take them? Not to mention the psychological effects of this. I mean, this is interfering with development. I mean, people under a certain age ought to be protected from these sorts of things, I would suggest. But that now is seen as legal, as is someone declaring themselves to be a certain thing, being able to participate in all aspects of the more conventional understanding of what that is, including sports, including shower rooms and bathrooms. I mean, all right. I mean, I don't want to go too far here because, again, this is YouTube. And in these times when we have certain topics of verboten, we can't do that. So, I mean, I don't know where to go with it. I mean, there are a couple of people, by the way, that I want to be interviewing soon that I'm not even going to do it on YouTube just because I want to protect my YouTube channel. And ultimately, I'm hoping to transfer away from YouTube, but YouTube remains the main venue of communication right now. So I don't really have a lot of choice if I want to do this. And I'm committed to doing this every day. I want to go live every single day, Monday through Friday, every weekday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. And so that's what I'm doing. One of the major charges that I'm seeing put out there right now against anyone that doesn't genuflect to the present administration and the present zeitgeist in our culture is that you are involved in conspiracy theories. You're a conspiracist. That this is something that on the surface is seen as wrong, but in the broader sense may be criminalized. And so I want to talk a little bit about this. I know I just did a little TikTok on it, but I'd like to elaborate a bit on this topic and certainly invite anyone to join me if you have any thoughts on this. The phone number is 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. Dr. Steve Turley will be joining me at 1 p.m. from Eastern Time from Turley Talks. He's really his daily YouTube is an inspiration to me. I mean, he looks at the positive side of what he calls a growing national and international nationalist, populist, conservative movement, traditionalist movement. And he always tends to look at the positive. So in these times, I find that to be very uplifting because I need to hear something good. I mean, and I believe there's a lot good going on, by the way. I'm an optimist by nature. So in spite of the fact that I feel that, rights are shrinking, we can't say certain things that are normal to talk about. We can't talk about, for example, this past election anymore because, this is like a banana republic. It's sort of almost like a junta. The powers that be, people who are in power, you can't criticize how they got there. You can't look at those things. That's what they do in like dictatorships. Well, that's what we have here now. It's very difficult to talk about that. Even if you're a sitting member of Congress, you could be censored for even bringing it up. But getting back to the question of conspiracy theory, first of all, conspiracy theories are very dangerous if they are related to, in two ways, if they're related to any group of people based upon their ethnic background, their race, that to suggest that an entire people could be involved in a conspiracy is obviously false, and it should be rejected because conspiracies are things that are engaged in by a small group of people who conspire. They get together and they figure out how they're going to undermine the social order, how they're going to break the law, how they're going to, change the nature of how we think, and do so in secret. I mean, that's what conspirare means in Latin. Whisper. It's a secret grouping that are getting together and planning something, and part of that can mean a broadening of an idea that is packaged and marketed in a way that is not exactly what it actually is. So you can have large numbers, even millions of people following it without really thinking of themselves as involved in a conspiracy. And they're not, but they're involved in an idea that is based upon what originally was a conspiracy. And they're viewing life in a broad sense in a conspiratorial context. Now, the two kinds of conspiracy theories, thus, that are not responsible are those based upon someone's ethnic background or race or religion, because that's impossible. That can't be a conspiracy. When you are a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian, you're not involved in a conspiracy. You're involved in a faith. And, there may have been, aspects of that belief system that were part of a conspiracy, but you're not really a conscious conspirator. And so it's a little too broad to suggest that all Jews or all Muslims or all whomever are involved in conspiring, because that's not possible. The second element, though, is that, all right, now having said that, and having looked at the conspiracies that should be rejected, nevertheless, quite clearly, conspiracies exist, political conspiracies, social conspiracies, criminal conspiracies, They exist and they happen all the time. This is part of life. People get together, usually a small group, and they try to figure out how to do something secretly that benefits them and that hurts someone else. And that's what criminal conspiracies are. A group of people that rob a bank, that's a conspiracy. They have conspired, they have plotted, they have planned, and they have hatched a plan to rob a bank. And by doing so, they have engaged in a criminal conspiracy. And in the process, they have hurt people, either indirectly in the form of stealing money or directly in the form of committing violence in the course of their conspiracy, possibly shooting someone. These are criminal conspiracies. Breaking and entering a house is a criminal conspiracy if you are doing it with more than one person. You have to have at least two people for something to be a conspiracy. If you're just walking down the street and you break into a home as a lone actor, that's not a conspiracy, that's just a crime. But if you are working with other people to do it, then that becomes a criminal conspiracy. That's obvious. That's in the law. That's something that every system of justice, every nation that establishes a system of laws, is set up to try to expose those sorts of conspiracies and to then prosecute people involved in them to make sure that they are punished and that there is some indirect form of justice or recompense to try to make up for something that's already happened. Of course, you can't go backwards. I mean, if you hurt someone in the course of a bank robbery, they're hurt. I mean, you can't undo that. But we have a system of justice by which a person, who has been a victim of that conspiracy can at least get some kind of a recompense, usually financial, and that the people involved in the conspiracy itself, if found guilty of that, are punished in a manner that fits the crime, that's appropriate. So we have a system of criminal justice that addresses criminal conspiracies. But so therefore, why would there not be political conspiracies? Why would there not be social conspiracies? There are conspiracies around any situation that involves something that people can gain illicitly. That's human nature. That's the criminal mind. So if you have, and politics is power. Politics is public power. Holding a political office is a powerful thing. It can benefit a person on a lot of levels, materially, certainly, in terms of, getting ahead financially, but also psychically. It satisfies an aspect of our nature that wants to hold influence and wants to, change the nature of things. And so we're willing to go to certain degrees, possibly some of us, that might be deceptive in order to achieve those positions. And of course, that can include things like assassinations and wars and, major political conspiracies. I mean, the assassination of John F. Kennedy was a political conspiracy, I would argue. Of course, the Warren Commission said it was just a lone nut gunman, in which case it was not a conspiracy. I think that most people understand that it was a conspiracy. Same thing with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, I did a book on this topic called Assassination in America, where I talk about 32 cases where there was a political conspiracy to either assassinate or if someone was assassinated, or there was a plot to assassinate possibly, or there were rumors that there might have been an assassination. And I look at 32 cases in American history of this, going all the way from Alexander Hamilton right up to the Clinton body count. And you can get that. It's on Amazon.com, called Assassination in America. I've been told it's a pretty entertaining book. My point here is simply that conspiracies of a political nature happen. And we have a system of justice that is established by which we can investigate those. When we do investigate them, we ought to do so with factual, it's a science like anything else. There should be, it should be done responsibly, just like we have a science or a kind of a soft science of sociology, of anthropology, of statistics, of economics. We ought to have a science of conspiracy. It ought to be taught at colleges. It ought to be a course. People ought to get a degree in it. They ought to then go on and become employed as conspiracy analysts. It ought to be something that's understood, so that, because it is something that exists, it is a discipline that ought to be involved in exposing them. And if you take a look at higher levels of power, you do have a broader conspiracy, I would suggest. And that doesn't mean, that everyone is sitting around in a smoke-filled room, but it means that at some point there is furtive and secretive proceedings that plot to do something that either benefit a small group of people directly in terms of material wealth, or indirectly in terms of their karmic desire to control the world. I mean, that's an insane thing, or to control a nation, or to control a group, or to control a people. Gets into a question of sanity, as I've said. And people who are extremely brilliant can also be completely insane when it comes to these sorts of things. I mean, this desire to, have a meaning in life at the expense of others, as opposed to simply an ordinary desire to have meaning and to have influence based upon ideas and based upon convictions that can be identified. You can have a conspiracy of what former communist Whittaker Chambers called a conspiracy of gentlemen. He doesn't say that there was an outright conspiracy. It was just that it was a conspiracy by people who think alike and who think in a way that seeks to subvert the way people do things, to subvert human nature, and who plot to do that and figure out ways to do it by means of deception, subversion, infiltration. Now, the two greatest conspiracy theories, and when I say great, I don't mean great in a good way, of this past 20th century and into today, were the communist and the Nazi conspiracies, or the communist and the fascist conspiracies. They were conspiratorial, secretive philosophies of power and of politics, by which a small group of people would control a nation or control an organization, to the ultimate goal of controlling the entire world. This is something that's unnatural, because the more natural condition is for the individual under God to control their own life and their own destiny to the highest degree possible, and then to delegate a limited grant of power to a government to conduct very specific functions within a written body of law, a constitution that is equally applied. That's the American philosophy of government. And I think that's not only the philosophy that best mirrors human nature in its best aspects, but it's also the most progressive. I think that's been proven. And it doesn't mean that every nation can adopt it in the same way we do. They adopt it in their own ways based upon a reflection of their own unique cultures. And that means certain things are there and certain things are not. But either way, it is a free will issue of human nature that we can adopt principles that advance our own lives and our own destinies and that of our fellow citizens. We can talk about that. That is, the nature of sovereign nation states, which is a very progressive idea. The conspirators are seeking to undo that because they want to transfer those rights from God to themselves. And many of them want to do this, and they believe sincerely that they're doing something good. I would suggest that this is a grand conspiracy. And this is the very root of both Nazism and communism, both of which are conspiratorial philosophies and means of government, both of which are undermining the basic function of human nature and all of its best aspects. Anything that involves world order is, I would suggest, a conspiracy, because world order is not natural. The natural state of man is localism, is control of your, that which results in the maximum degree of control by the individual over their own life and destiny, not, removal of that control to such a high degree. So in a broad sense, I would define that as what Whittaker Chambers called the conspiracy of gentlemen, not a conspiracy literally, although there certainly are conspirators. But getting back to what we are looking at now, when we see the new regime, the new left power structure, which has just assumed power in this country, what they are calling conspiracies. What they call conspiracies is any opinion or any group that embraces an opinion that contradicts their power. That is what they say is a conspiracy. And I think the best response to that right now, besides pointing out that yes, there are conspiracies, and that yes, there are responsible, sober, rational approaches to defining those conspiracies so that we can identify them in public, what they believe in, what their nature is, and thus expose them so that they are no longer conspiracies. Something is no longer a conspiracy if it is pulled out from the shadows and placed out in the open, where it can be judged and then discerned in terms of what is there that's both good and bad. There may be aspects of it that we embrace. There may be good things. I mean, was it a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler? Yes, but I would suggest it was a good conspiracy, right? It was something that freed Nazi Germany of its evil dictator and would have moved it in the right direction, or at least potentially. So, conspiracies per se are not always bad, and there might be elements of them that are good. My point is that we need to study them so we can then make up our own minds out in the open. That's called democracy. That's where people elect representatives to craft legislation based upon information, based upon their will. So when someone says in this particular atmosphere, where we do have a level of oppression that is discernible and that very well may grow and that threatens individual freedoms, when you are accused of being a conspiracy theorist, my response, besides pointing out that conspiracies are happening all the time and there's a responsible way to approach them, is to turn the tables and point out that the biggest conspiracy theories of the past 5 years have been sanctioned by the left and that have been openly promulgated and financed by the left. The biggest one is that former President Donald J. Trump was spying for Russia. This was a completely concocted idea. This was a conspiracy theory that proved to be untrue, by the way. I mean, if it had been true, it would have been the biggest story of the past 200 or 300 years. It would have been the biggest story in American history. An American president spying for a foreign power openly. I mean, actually, in other words, he would have been a traitor to the United States. He would have been loyal to Putin. This was a conspiracy theory that was openly and unabashedly promoted for all of the years of the Trump administration. They got a special counsel in place who spent $35 million. They sent out day after day, week after week, a drip, drip, drip propaganda campaign to promote it. And then they followed it up with a second conspiracy theory, which was that Donald Trump had done something illegal when he asked the prime minister of the Ukraine to investigate what was already being investigated, and that was the corruption of the Biden family, that they were involved in, graft and, basically payoffs and use of their office, influence peddling, by Biden having his son put on the payroll of a corrupt oil company, and then he blackmailed Ukraine to try to get them to stop investigating that oil company because it could have exposed his son. And he threatened to withhold foreign aid that had been approved by Congress unless they stopped the investigation, and they did. And he bragged about it on television in front of all groups, the Council on Foreign Relations. President Trump simply asked the Ukrainians whether or not that investigation was continuing. And for that, he was accused of conspiring and of having committed a crime. That in itself is a false conspiracy theory, that he had done something wrong. Third, the final one with Trump, that he wanted to lead an insurrection and overthrow the government so he could stay in office as president of the United States. That is probably the most wacky, the most ridiculous of all of them. That he sent up, these nuts dressed in black clothes and buffalo suits to breach the U.S. Capitol during the joint session of Congress, so they would stop counting the votes, and thus he would remain president. I mean, think about the idiocy of that. The most asinine idea, and yet he was impeached for it. And it was an ugly, ugly scene. Obviously, nobody lost more from that incursion than Trump. And now evidence is coming out that there were radical groups on both sides involved in it, and that it had been planned in advance, including Antifa. And that the House was warned about it by the FBI about a week before it happened. Everybody knew about it. I mean, hell, I was talking about it on TikTok. I mean, that this could happen. To be careful that Antifa might infiltrate the peaceful protesters in Washington that day, who simply wanted to make sure that any evidence that what might be there with regard to voter irregularities would be presented on the floor of the House, and that 7 states were scheduled to contest their elections because 7 alternative delegations had been selected and believed that they could make a case that their elections had been tainted in those 7 states. And people like me, and I think people of goodwill, were waiting to see this evidence one way or the other so it could be publicly aired and we could then make a judgment one way or the other. Well, the fact is that the incursion into the U.S. Capitol stopped that process. We will never hear the evidence now. And now the Supreme Court has further slammed the door on it by refusing to hear whether or not Pennsylvania had violated the U.S. Constitution by having the governor and the state Supreme Court go in and change election laws in advance, something that does violate the Constitution, Article 2, Section 3, which says that the state legislators shall make laws with regard to elections. But the Supreme Court isn't hearing it. It's a big subject. It's more than I want to get into right now. But it's not a good day for freedom. It's not a good piece of news. You had Clarence Thomas dissenting and doing so eloquently, backed by Justices Gorsuch and Alito. But where the hell was Amy Coney Barrett? I don't know who or what she is, but apparently she didn't see anything. So that's not a good piece of news. I'll be reporting on other things that are going to be coming out, though, as the weeks move on. I take a long view of this. I do believe there was a conspiracy. I'm not going to say the nature of it because I don't want to get banned on YouTube, but I stand by it. and I won't be silenced. However it takes, I intend to continue to investigate it with whatever facilities I have available to me. And I have to use vague language because I want to keep some of those facilities, actually. Anyway, to wrap things up for now, and I've got Steve Turley coming up in about 20 minutes. If someone accuses you of being a conspiracy theorist, ask them where they were on the biggest conspiracy theory of the past 5 years. Did they think that Donald Trump was spying for Russia? Ask them if they thought that Donald Trump had, sought to overthrow the government and keep himself in power, which is what an insurrection is. And it kind of throws them on their backside because those were conspiracy theories. The people that embraced those ideas, they were conspiracy theorists, and they were not responsible ones. They did not look into it. They did not have reason on their side. They had nothing but lies and false accusations. So on that note, I'm going to thank you for joining me. I'll be back in about 20 minutes with Dr. Steve Turley. Please subscribe to me on YouTube. Please subscribe to me on TikTok. My books are available at Amazon Books. Apparently they're selling better now for some reason. Put my name in the server, Charles Moscowitz, Moscow, W-I-T-Z, and you will see about 15 books come up. You can check them out. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody.